Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 11th edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Artistic Director Kate Sears-Patowski, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership by the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. This afternoon, I'm excited to welcome artists Jenny Kendler and Katie West, who'll be in conversation with curator Sharmila Wood. Sharmila, whose exhibition, Actions for the Earth, Art, Care, and Ecology, is currently on view at the Block Museum at Northwestern University, will lead the group in a discussion about interdisciplinary and participatory artistic practices that engage the connecting threads of ecoculture and ecological histories, ancient and indigenous knowledge, spirituality, and healing actions. Sharmila participated in our 2023 Curatorial Exchange program, and I couldn't be more thrilled to welcome her back to Chicago. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Can we also give a round of applause to Kate and Taylor and the Expo team? She's a rock star. I firstly wanted to start the conversation by acknowledging the Indigenous people on whose lands we are meeting and having this conversation today. I'm in Chicago in connection to the exhibition Actions for the Earth, Art, Care, and Ecology, which is currently at the Block Museum of Art. It's an exhibition that I've developed in collaboration with Independent Curators International, based out of New York. They're the production partners. And I'd all encourage everybody to go and visit if they get the opportunity, because it's an exhibition that requires sensorial qualities of touch and engagement. It's an exhibition that really foregrounds practices of Eastern philosophies, of animism, of spirituality. It's being created as an antidote to some of the types of extractivist colonial violences that we find ourselves living in. So if you have the opportunity, please come down to the block and visit it. I'm very pleased to be on stage here with Jenny Kendler and Katie West. And what we're going to do is have some time for Jenny to make a presentation and Katie, so we are familiar with their work, and then we'll have a conversation and there'll be some time for questions afterwards. So I'll hand the mic to Jenny.
Hello. So I'm going to give a really short artist talk. I think I'm going to wait for my slides to come up. And just to give you all an overview of the work that I do, I'm really grateful to be here with Sharmila and Katie. My work is not part of the exhibition, but I think I was brought in to be a local voice, and of course my practice does focus around all of these same concerns. And actually I was in an exhibition in London at the Hayward Gallery last summer with several of the artists that are in the show, and was really a treat to see their beautiful work here in Chicago. Wonderful. Here are my slides. So forgive me, I'm going to fly a little bit because we want to make enough time to be able to be sure that we can have our discussion and also have time for your questions. So I'm an interdisciplinary ecological artist. I'm a wild forager and a naturalist. And my practice centers around our relationship with the more than human world, thinking about how to decenter the human. And for 20 years, which was sort of astonishing to realize, I've been focusing around biodiversity loss and the climate crisis. So this piece that you're seeing here is a project that I created for Storm King Art Center. It was called Artists on Climate Change, and what you're looking at is 40 feet of reflective steel, which shows 100 eyes of birds that are threatened or endangered by climate change. And actually, if you're in Chicago, this actual piece is now on the 606, which is a raised trail here in the city of Chicago. It was recreated for the exhibition I just mentioned at the Hayward. This was on their sculpture court overlooking the Waterloo Bridge. And in each of these instances, I'm working with ornithologists and conservation biologists to select the species. So they have a very site-specific nature to them. This is the third one that's been created in the series. In conjunction with this, and my practice also covers sculptural work. I'm a long-term research-based artist. And I also make a lot of sound work. So this project, what you're looking at, you can see clearly it's in front of the other work. And there's this microphone that's buried inside this dish of scented lichen. And the prompt is to ask people to make a secret confession to the natural world. As they're speaking, their words are then live transliterated into the song of an endangered bird. And this piece actually, this is a remake of a piece that I made in 2014, which actually debuted here at Expo as part of my long-term artist residency with the Natural Resources Defense Council, who has been a persistent partner and supporter to me in many of the works that you'll see here. So I'm oftentimes working at this intersection of art, advocacy, activism, environmental policy. This is a piece that does a good job of illustrating that. So this is at the MCA Chicago. My work is a series of flags that you're seeing, which are flags that are made in collaboration with frontline activists that name the 1,000 water bodies that were crossed by the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast Pipeline. And this project is really an open source idea that we gave to activists and sent out to different people. People started making them. This one showed up on a tree sit. But I think that this project, it does a good job of showing how art can really function in a way where we have like a version of it that's in a big museum. Those same flags were actually used to block bulldozers at the Yellowfinch tree sit. They've been at DEQ hearings, and so they become a type of object that can function in many different ways, which is something that I don't shy away from in my work. I also have an activist practice. So for some time, I was the art coordinator for the city of Chicago for Extinction Rebellion, where I did things like make giant banners along with my friends and collaborators, but also was an organizer helping to create direct actions and arrestable actions and bring together a coalition of folks where we were actually able to pressure the city of Chicago to declare a climate emergency, although there certainly is much more teeth that needs to be added to that. And then, back to some of the longer term projects. This one is called Underground Library. It takes a many-year collection of books on climate change. So these were nonfiction books that range from the classic Limits to Growth and Bill McKibben's The End of Nature, going all the way back to the 70s, and thinking about folks who were making these clarion calls to the public to wake up and recognize that climate change was happening, pouring their love and attention into these books that then sat, many of them unread on library shelves. So these are many of these books were deaccessioned from libraries, and I could see the cards inside of them never having been checked out. So you can see here what you're looking at clearly is burned books, but these are not a typical book burning, although they definitely have a tongue-in-cheek reference to what you might think of as a book burning. They are biochar, which is a low oxygen process that converts them into a highly stable form of carbon that can then be sequestered in the earth, indefinitely taking that carbon out of the carbon cycle. So as a way to honor their words and also memorialize them while having a small literal remediation to the problem of climate change that the work is discussing. That's a thread that you'll see through my work as well, as trying to nod towards or actually participate in ecological restoration. This is a project that was also at the MCA. It's a piano that plays the music of extinction using a data set that I collaborated with scientists to create, and an algorithm that predicts how many elephants might die of poaching in any particular year. It plays essentially for 25 years into the future, at which point it falls silent, helping us to imagine what it might be like to know that elephants were extinct. And of course, all of this is played on an ivory keyboard. It's a player piano, so it's played with, no hands, a ghostly kind of presence. And it's played on ivory, which is, of course, what's driving the poaching crisis. So you'll see this thread of kind of poetic materiality, the source of the materials, where did they come from, where do they go after the project also runs through my work. This is a project called Amber Archive, which is a series of artist-created amber nodules that attempt to kind of create a biogenetic library of the species that we might stand to lose in this era of the sixth extinction. So it's feather, fur bone, claws, stems of plants. This is a stag beetle. And it sort of imagines a future in which we might use this genetic material to revive the species, but also provides a portrait of what we stand to lose. This is a project that I made with a collaborator of mine who's here in the audience, an artist named Andrew Bernot. These are called the whale bells, and they are a series of hand-blown glass bells where the bell clapper itself is the ear bone, so it's called the tympanic bullae, of a extinct species of rorqual whale. The idea behind that is thinking about how the part of the body that once received sound in these ancient silent seas that existed far before humans were polluting the oceans with oil and gas exploration and Navy sonar, is now releasing the sound back to us here in the present, and what that message might be, especially thinking about the whaling trade and how many of these whales were almost driven to extinction. This is a set that exists on a National Geographic icebreaker, where the intent is that they actually are rung by the Arctic Ocean itself. And in conjunction with that, we oftentimes have the bells performed. There's been scores written for them or improvisatory performances, but it's really exciting to think about this idea of them also as an instrument that can be activated. And getting close to the end. This is a project from the O'Hare Airport. So for those of you who might have come in on an international flight, you can see a large commission of actually 17 Chicago artists who created these 25-foot works that are permanently at the airport. My project is showing 3D scans of birds who died in window collisions in the city of Chicago that I collected actually with my 5-year-old daughter. They were then set into the 9 constellations that have the names of birds, and the case itself was chemically etched with imprints of the birds, which is actually a real phenomenon that sometimes happens in these tragic collisions. The goal with this project is not only to memorialize and honor these birds, but also to try to pressure the city of Chicago to think about why it hasn't fully enacted the Chicago Bird Protection Ordinance. And so Chicago is the deadliest city for birds in the United States. And we know that nationwide in the United States, 2 billion birds die each year in window impacts. So this is a serious issue, but it's also one that can be addressed if people have the political courage. And then I'll come to my contemporary project that I'm working on right now and hand the mic over. This is a project that will be opening in June, mid-June, on Governor's Island in New York City. Please come if you'd like. It's open to the public. It's a public art project that'll be up through November. It's called Other of Pearl, and the central artwork in the exhibition is a series of sculptures that have been created in collaboration with a quite non-human organism, the pearl-bearing oyster. And so I've been taking most famous icons of Greco-Roman statuary and giving them to the oysters to mutate as they will. And part of what I'm thinking about here is how the founding myths of the West are echoed in our art, right? And they tell oftentimes a violent story of us breaking away from nature, setting ourselves apart as the owners of nature, as the ones that have dominion over it. And so if this statuary is also part of that story, what does it mean if we might turn this over to this profoundly non-human organism to mutate? And so I give them to the oysters and they do what they will. And part of that is about also the release of agency and what that means as an artist to say that if we're not in control, is that also part of this narrative of decentering the human? So thank you so much for listening, and I'll look forward to talking to you at the end of the show.
Thanks so much, Jenny. Such beautiful work, and I'm really excited that I got to hear you speak about it in person rather than trying to look online and make sense of it also. So I'm Katie West. I'm an Injabrundi woman from the Pilbara region in Western Australia, and I live and work in the south of Western Australia on Yunga Whadjuk and Yunga Balladong country. So I'll click along. So my practice as a young person really started with trying to make sense of my family history and how that fits into a bigger narrative of Australian history. So my family was affected by government policies which we know as connected to the stolen generations, which saw the separation of Indigenous families across Australia. And it was a very deliberate attempt to and an act of genocide, essentially to break apart our families, disconnect us from our countries, And I'm sure you're aware of policies that have done similar in North America as well to First Nations people. So in going on that journey to see where our family fitted in that picture, I've done other things sort of parallel to my art practice. So I spent a bit of time working in as a tutor at a university teaching in Indigenous health. And it was quite a confronting experience because I was teaching about the social determinants of health to first-year health students and sort of being confronted with content that related to situations going on in my family and also finding that a lot of the students would either be kind of really compassionate, wanting to know about our cultures and history, but sort of being a bit apprehensive about how to engage in those conversations, and then outright resistance to engaging in those conversations. So at that time, meditation became really important to me. So I would meditate before going into those classes, and then going on, I sort of felt like maybe we all need to have cultivate a bit of calm before we have these difficult conversations about our histories. So I'll go in and talk about this work. This work is entitled Clearing, which is currently at part of Actions for the Earth at the Block. I was commissioned by Tarawara Museum of Art just outside of Melbourne to make this work in 2018, 2019. And at this time, I really wanted to make a piece that felt like a meditative space, but was also very much grounded in the country where the museum sat. So the pieces are dyed using plants, mainly eucalypts and acacias growing on Wurundjeri country. And there's also a sound component that involves field recordings. So myself and my partner did walks around the local area to collect those. My partner, Simon Charles, is a musician and composer who helps me with my sound work. And the other key aspect of that is a kind of guided meditation that is a little bit inspired by Yoga Nidra. If you've ever done Yoga Nidra, it's about tuning into different parts of your body. The spoken word does that, but also expands out to thinking about fur and wings and synapses, that sort of thing. So expanding out to a more than human sense of the body. I just got a few more images here. So this installation also invites the viewer to actually take up space and sort of adjust the space depending on how they would like it as well. So there's cushions on the ground. Viewers can take a seat and also move the cushions as they see fit. In this first iteration and what we're seeing at the block as well, people are taking up that invitation to sit and rest. And here we go. Oh, sorry, I'll just go back one. What else can I say? Another key point of this work was also, oh no. Okay, we're all good. You might see there's a little shelf of books on the wall there. I also wanted to include some texts by First Nations authors in Australia. So quite fortunately, there were a couple of texts by Wurundjeri elders that we could include in the space. They're both actually children's books as well, so it was nice to include some books that children could actually engage in too. And And then the other books were by Bruce Pascoe, entitled Dark Emu, which I think came out in 2014 and has actually been a really important book for the conversations around First Nations life in Australia. What he basically did was look at the early European settler journals and looked for any instances of First Nations people engaging in agriculture, which might not sound like much, but when very early in Australia's colonial history, there was a doctrine of terra nullius. So the British decided that there were no people present to have a conversation with about treaty or anything like that. So his book really changed the conversation in Australia. And yeah, I've just felt it was important to include these books to sort of say that our knowledges are out there, they're accessible in written form. And yeah, so that was the idea there. Sorry, okay. This work is a much more recent work shown at the National Four in Sydney, which is a survey of Australian art that happens every year. This piece was entitled "The Women Pluck the Star Pickets from the Ground and Turn Them into Wanna, or Digging Sticks." So you might recognise the star pickets. They're used to create paddocks and farms across the landscape. I started to become interested in them because they're very similar in form to a digging stick. However, there's very different relationship to country going on in terms of the use of this form. So each star picket, I actually enlisted the help of my grandfather, who is a farmer, to make this work. So he welded the stands together and then created the little mounts for the radios. The radios kind of came from thinking about my experience growing up on a farm in Western Australia, which grew sheep and wheat, and how we'd be working all over, but the radio would always be on, whether it was in the ute or in a shed. And with the radios, also thinking about the voices broadcast across country. So more recently, the kind of the dominant news sources, but also thinking about the very long tradition of First Nations people in Australia of singing. Singing is basically the main form that our ancestors and people who hold that knowledge today hold knowledge of country. And these songs connect across the whole country. While singing is not like the written form, it's actually a very robust system for holding knowledge across long periods of time. Yes, so let's go. Also with these works, I've incorporated found fabric. I'm very interested in using found fabric, found materials, folding in that sort of, not wanting to consume. And the process of making string and weaving to kind of connect back to women's fibre crafts in Australia. So, I included this work. So this was a exhibition at Pika that sort of folded in a number of these different themes of meditation, weaving, found textiles. Also included a sound component, thinking about the process of making string. And I may not have time to talk about this particular work, but this was made, a video work made up in Nyalama country in the Pilbara, next door to Yunjirundi country, also significant country to Sharm and her family. And yeah, thank you.
So I'm interested in interrogating a little bit more about your relationship to particular land and places, given that a lot of the work you do and the actions that you make are very deeply rooted to particular places. Are there areas of land that are significant to you, and can you talk about them and your relationship to them?
I loved seeing that question when you emailed them to us ahead of time, because that's a very complicated one for me. I grew up in Virginia, and you could see the project that I was doing in support of the frontline defenders for the Mountain Valley Pipeline was definitely an attempt for me to reach back to that land that is very familiar to me, that's mountainous and forested. It's tremendously different from where I've lived for the last 20 years here in Chicago, which is one of the most transformed ecosystems in the world, tall grass prairie ecosystems, which is what this land once was. It was 60% tall grass prairie and 40% oak savanna. We have 1/10,000th of our tall grass prairies remain. So it's been almost entirely extinguished from the face of the earth. And when I came here, it was a lot of work to try to learn how to see the prairie and to understand it. I think that we're oftentimes taught to understand verticality is the way that we engage with magnificence, but the prairie is very different. It's about a tiny tapestry. It's taken me years, and I do feel very connected now to the prairie ecosystem. I'm actually making a project at the Chicago Botanic Gardens with a collaborator named Giovanni Oloy that is reconstructing a destroyed prairie that, again, I said this is how endangered they are, and yet the Rockford Airport bulldozed an 8,000-year-old old-growth prairie to put in an unnecessary access road, and so we've created a memorial to that. But I think that it's maybe an interesting, to give a little bit of an overview, it's maybe an interesting way to think about how we can reconnect. Many of us don't live on the land that we were born on. Many of us don't live on the land that our ancestors were connected to, or we come from these blended backgrounds. And so I would say and encourage people to just try to find whatever scraps there are remaining, whether it's the little patch of grass out back of your house, or even to remember that we're here in our own, animal bodies, which we take with us no matter how, quote, urban the environment might be.
I suppose I feel really connected to a couple of places. So the first place that I grew up in would be the Wheaton sheep farm I mentioned earlier on Nyunga Yuward country. Growing up on a farm, I feel very privileged in terms of the childhood I had. I had a lot of freedom. I could basically tell my grandparents I'm going in this direction, and I could just go with my brother. So we kind of grew up being able to really know this patch of land really, really well, like the minute details of plants and different kinds of sands. And I feel like it was a taste of having that kind of spatial memory for a place that humans are wired to have, all our ancestors have an experience of in some way. The other place I feel connected to, but it's still very much a work in progress, rebuilding that connection, is to Yunjirundi country, which is 2,000 kilometres north of where I grew up. And so that country is really, really different. And so kind of very hot country, lots of red dirt, huge ironstone, which is mined for iron ore. I suppose I've made a few trips up there. And I've been really fortunate to connect with other elders who've been affected by stolen generations policies and have gone back later in their life and really made an effort to get to know the plants in that area, and they've sort of shown the way in terms of how I could reconnect with my own family and the slow, steady way you can gain knowledge of a place over many years.
So slow, steady processes that engage audiences are very instrumental to both your practices. I wonder if you can talk about how you think manifesting a consciousness of our place and our interconnectedness with ecology is also a way towards climate action, to impel people towards action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is a central purpose of the work that I do. I know some people don't feel comfortable with the idea of art being for something. I feel differently. For me, art is a way to change culture. And culture is actually what underlies all of the choices that we're making, from our governmental structures to our economic structures. And so I think in a crisis like the climate crisis, we need all the tools in the toolbox, and artists certainly can be part of that. Yeah, so you're asking also about moving slowly? I think, I want to embody both of these things at the same time, both this like slowness, a deep time view, which you can definitely see in the work. I'm thinking about amber that might fossilize millions of years in the future, or whale ear bones that come from millions of years in the past. And so there is a slowness there. There's also, of course, an urgency to this issue. And I do really think that that understanding the culture that we created that broke us away from the earth is really the key here, because that is what allows human supremacy. And human supremacy is the supremacy. It's the supremacy that underlies patriarchy and that underlies white supremacy. And my belief is that until we tackle that like lack of connection with the place that we came from, we won't be actually successful in being able to combat, the systems of violence and hegemony that, we see everywhere in the news today. So I think that slow reconnection is a very important part of the urgent, fast work that we need to do at the same time.
Yeah, I totally feel that, and I also think about the climate issue as an issue of relationships. So our relationships with the earth, the places we live, are totally out of sync, and and I also want to make the point that we're all Indigenous to somewhere. Some of us are closer to generations of family and ancestors who lived in a land-based way, but we all come from that land-based way of life. So with my work, I'm very interested in creating spaces that where we can either reflect on that kinship through meditation, so perhaps more at an individual level, or a few people alongside you, or otherwise I've also done projects where that involves serving tea, so serving tea that might be sourced from that local area, so local plants, or maybe further afield but still kind of local. It's a difficult area, the native food aspect, but I've also feel like the act of drinking tea together is an opportunity to build that familiarity and also recall. It's interesting in a gallery space to be drinking tea and you recall all the other times in your life where you've shared tea with your family at home. The other sort of invitation I've offered is to make string out of found fabric within the gallery space, and that's with that, I've been thinking about how fibre practices, making by hand together, all of those times where we might have been making fishing nets or baskets or repairing our homes. Those are times where we would have been alongside of our families and maintaining those kinship connections. So talking about whatever was important at that time. So I think, it's thinking about carbon and the quantity and how to extract it. I found that really I just couldn't grasp that. But in thinking about those kinship connections, I feel like I've found a way to create little small instances of connection.
Just in terms of how you foster a space where people can, and audiences and through art, it could foster that connection with the more than human world. Can you talk a little bit about any tactics or spaces you've created where you feel like you've been able to invite that, have that invitation to people?
Yeah, I think that this governs a lot of the strategies in my work, which is oftentimes, although sometimes the works end up being large, they really there's always this delicacy and intimacy to them, and I'm oftentimes thinking about the work being directly in scale with the human body so that we have this sensuous bodily relationship with it, which I think is really the way that we would have all once been in relation with the natural world. And I really appreciated what you said about everyone having a history of indigeneity, and I think that that's the most important thing for me to think about, is how to help root people back in their animal body as they're experiencing the work. I think it does something profound, and I really believe that we, as a species, we evolved to be in intimate relationship with our non-human kin, to understand the seasons and where plants grew and when the fish spawned. And now that part of our lives is missing for almost everyone. There's some of us that try to rekindle and relearn this lost art of foraging as a way to reconnect. But I think that it's left us both profoundly ecologically bored and very lonely. And maybe people don't even know, but I think that they feel that somewhere in them, and it's also what makes it very easy for us to be, so hungry to fill that with other things that our, extractive capitalist system is offering to us, to fill that sense of loneliness. So I hope with the work it's delicate, it's quiet, sometimes it's quite fragile. It is using these strategies of aesthetics from the natural world, and very much mimicking the way in which we once might have engaged with the non-human.
I think we're always engaged with the non-human. It is a bit of I think to go, there's a bit of a buzz around this notion of non-human connection, that kind of thing. But the truth is we're always entangled, even if it's not pretty. So I think I know early on with the thinking about the tea thing, I would get very actually neurotic about I got to find tea that's from this local area. But then sort of going, well, actually, also the tea that's sat in the staff room cupboard at the gallery is also fine, and that's also a connection to place. So I think in terms of my own practice, I'm not quite so I guess strict about those particular things, but I think it is important to highlight that we are always entangled with the non-human, even if it's not something that we really want to look at, even if it's really disturbing. What was the rest of that question? Sorry.
I think it's about what are the kind of tactics and how do you invite participation into your work, and how does that participation then foster a greater connection with your art practice?
I don't know. I feel like I spoke about that a little bit with the tea, so maybe I'll leave it there.
I think we're going to questions from the audience soon, so I just wanted to ask a question and a conversation that's been coming up, which is about motherhood and its relationship to art practice. So I just wanted to discuss briefly, how does it impact your art practice being a mother, and what are the kind of challenges or creative portals that have been accessed as a result of becoming a mum?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that sometimes artists' status as parents, whatever their gender identity may be, is elided. It's something that is still not welcomed in art spaces and in the art world in many ways. So yeah, I'm a parent to a 5-year-old person who's named Kestrel, which is a falcon species. And yeah, people sometimes ask, they say, like, did having a child like catalyze your care for, suddenly you went like, oh, I do care about the future. And I have to laugh and say, no, this is like my practice before. And I think we were talking about this, and I said, because, prior to having my own little biological being, which was, quite marvelous, I still cared about children of salamanders and children of falcons and children of oak trees. But there's something profound about being knitted into the chain of life, and it's, you see with like the piece of, the Amber Archive, for example, thinking about how we send things into the future. I certainly think more and more as she gets older about how we might make things together. We did collect the dead birds for that one project, which I know some people might think, oh, I'm surprised you're doing that with your child, but she has the capacity for that, and I think that that can really teach you a lot, to see how resilient kids are, and that they're ready to understand what the world is really like. Protecting them from some of the difficult things actually doesn't serve them or us at all. So that is also part of the work.
I think a little bit similar in thinking about future generations prior to having a child. So I have a 9-month-old, and actually finding myself as an artist has been kind of the perfect career to take in terms of reconnecting with my family history. I feel like I've been able to create works that touch on things like this weaving and fibre traditions, and then those artworks go into collections. So having that kind of process means that my descendants and will know that they're connected to Yindjibarndi people and kin because of how basically the structure of the art world in a strange way. It is about holding and documenting. In terms of, because it's really busy with a 9-month-year-old, I'm starting to find the scale of what I do is getting smaller and for the better. So previously I felt a kind of pressure to create these larger installations and kind of really physically demanding, but now I am having to sort of do things while Ari's having a nap. So drawing and even doing drawing digitally as well. It's really nice to have sort of been turned in that direction of really small creative actions.
I think we're going to open up for any questions. Do we have any questions or comments?